Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this special colloquium on beauty in science. I'm sure it's a subject that's close to many people's heart as scientists. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce the speaker, Professor Brandon Vaidyanathan. He's actually a sociologist, and but he's been deeply interested in many issues with regard to scientists. I guess he thinks of us as an interesting tribe to study. So we have been the subjects of many of his studies in the past as well. But he is currently an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Sociology at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He's done his PhD in sociology from the University of Notre Dame. And I learned that the PhD thesis was actually on many aspects of work, life, religion in Bangalore and Dubai. So Bangalore, I learned, is also his parents' hometown, so he has a local connection. His research examines the cultural dimensions of religious, commercial, medical, and scientific institutions, and he's published widely in many of the major journals of sociology. And so today he will tell us about the results of his empirical study on beauty in science.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajesh, and my thanks to Veena and everyone else who helped organize this visit. I'm deeply grateful to be here. Can you all hear me okay? Is this a good place for me to stand? Does that work? Perfect. If by the way, I tend to speak really fast sometimes, so if you need me to slow down, please don't hesitate to stop me. And if you want me to go over anything, clarify anything as I speak, please don't hesitate to say so. So it's really an honor for me to be here and to share this work with you. Perhaps the first thing to talk about is why do this study. It's such a weird topic for many people, beauty in science. Maybe not to you all, maybe it seems pretty obvious why one would care about this. But as a sociologist, whenever I tell people that this is what I'm working on, like that's very odd. I mean, a lot of people don't associate beauty with science. The origins of this study are in a project we did about 7 or 8 years ago. I was doing a postdoc at Rice University, and we were doing a big international study of scientists studying what we call the social contexts of science. We're looking at ethics and family life and religion and so on in the lives of scientists. And at the end of the interviews we were doing, so we would do surveys and interviews, and at the end of these interviews, we would ask them, often they would tell us these stories about how difficult their lives were in science, a lot of sacrifices they had to make, sacrificing their health, working long hours in labs, sometimes sacrificing their marriages. We say, why would you do this? Like, what makes it worthwhile? And we heard them say over and over again, because it's beautiful. So we were interviewing physicists and biologists, not scientists in industry and folks who are doing applied work largely, but folks working on the bench. And they would tell us, they would use aesthetic terms like beauty because of beauty. And I found that really surprising, and I was really curious to understand what that meant. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, we thought to try to measure what does beauty mean to scientists, and how can we understand it? What role does it have in the sciences? But another reason why this topic is surprising is because of the public stereotype of science. There's this image problem that scientists have. This is, by the way, a sketch that some kids were invited to Fermilab in Chicago, and they were asked to, before they went to the lab, to draw an image of a scientist and their opinion of a scientist. This is not too far from what, at least in the US, the public perception of scientists is. If you ask your random person in the public to draw a scientist, this is probably draw someone who looks like Frank Wilczek, maybe. But this idea of the scientist as someone who sort of lives in their own world, somebody who is sort of really, disconnected from the world of emotions, right? Someone who's rational. I mean, even look at it's not just scientists, but science too has a bit of an image problem. Where you think of science, you think of terms like rational, systematic, analytical, methodical, calculating, etc. But seldom do we think of science as beautiful, right? And and maybe unless you're a scientist, but people in the general population. And there's an old critique, at least in the English-speaking world, that goes back to the Romantics and people like the poets like Keats, who complained that Newton had destroyed the poetry of the rainbow by reducing it to the prismatic colors. And there's a famous poem called Lamia, and he complains there, do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? And he means natural philosophy or natural science, and talks about how science will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air and nomad mind, unweave a rainbow, and so on. So this idea that science strips away the beauty from reality, the mystery from reality, is an old complaint. Blake and other poets as well during the Romantic era complained about this sort of thing. But scientists in recent decades, at least, have been pushing back against this kind of caricature. And so quite famously, Richard Dawkins wrote this book, Unweaving a Rainbow, Unweaving the Rainbow, precisely aimed at Keats's critique, right? And argued that this feeling of awe and wonder that science can give us is one of the highest experiences of which the human psyche is capable. It's a deep aesthetic passion, to rank with the finest that music and poetry can deliver. It's truly one of the things that make life worth living, right? So the sense is that, no, science doesn't take away the mystery. Richard Feynman has this great example where he says an artist friend of his would similarly, like Keats, complain and tell him, oh, you scientists, you strip away everything, reduce everything, you reductionists, you don't even know how to appreciate the beauty of a flower. And Feynman said, no, I know how to appreciate the beauty of a flower, not just the superficial beauty, but science gives me access to the deeper levels of reality, right? Helps me understand the structure and the deeper processes and mechanisms. And so it doesn't take away from the mystery, it doesn't subtract from the mystery, it only adds to it, right? So that's the kind of comments that scientists, prominent scientists have been making in recent years. From Chandrasekhar to Wilczek, so many Nobel Prize winners recently have been talking about the importance of beauty in science. But to what extent is this universal? Right? To what extent are the kinds of comments made by prominent scientists, celebrity scientists, Nobel Prize winners, shared by everyday scientists? To what extent do these geniuses, are they unique in the beauty in experiencing beauty in science, or do everyday scientists experience this beauty as well? That was the kind of question that I was interested in understanding. And that led me to do the study, which we conducted in 4 countries, the US, UK, Italy, and India. And I tried to understand the role of aesthetics in science. And the kinds of things we were trying to figure out were, what does beauty even mean to scientists? And we heard this word coming up, and we would hear some variations, some similarities, and we wanted to try to catalog and document, well, what does this term mean? What is the scope of this concept of beauty? How do scientists experience beauty, as well as other aesthetic experiences like awe and wonder in their scientific work? How often do they experience it? Where do they experience it? How do these experiences shape the practice of science? Do they matter at all in scientific work, or are they epiphenomenal? Are they just things you experience, but they are irrelevant, right? Or do they actually matter in shaping scientific work in any way? And finally, what implications could these experiences have for things like recruitment, drawing people into science, for well-being, for motivation, for retention in scientific careers? Right? So these are the kinds of things we were interested in trying to understand. And this study we conducted by drawing on scientists in physics and biology departments at PhD granting universities and research institutes in those 4 countries. We created a big, huge, fat list of 22,000 something scientists in those countries, scraped all the websites of PhD granting institutions, drew a mathematically representative sample, tried to convince those 22,000 scientists to take our survey. 5,000 something actually started the survey, and 3,442 completed the survey. A number of research institutes and universities blocked our study because they thought this was spam. And I'm sure many surveys ended up in people's spam filter and were never seen, right? But we don't know. We have no way to access that information. Don't know what the actual response rate is, compared to those who actually saw the survey invitation. for those of you in the audience who've taken our survey, I'm deeply grateful to you. Thank you so much for doing so. I know I personally delete survey invitations myself, which is horrible, but we get lots of them. And so I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to indulge and to contribute to this project. In addition to the surveys that we did, so there were a 15 to 20-minute survey that we conducted. After that, we also did in-depth interviews with 215 scientists, speaking to them for an hour or so at length, exploring some of the themes of the project. So to tell you a little bit about the sample then of the survey. So this is essentially who took our survey. We have scientists from these 4 countries. You can see the response rate in India was really the highest. I mean, so this is the population proportion. And so, Indian scientists were 10% of the total population and 39% of our survey samples. So very, very grateful for that high participation in India. Our sample was divided, 40-60 female and male, and then 53% were physicists, 40% biologists. And we sampled departments, right? So we had, folks in the biological sciences. There may be folks with chemistry degrees and so on in a department of biological sciences. So we have a few other kinds of fields as well represented. And then largely, postgraduate students were the sort of the bulk of our sample. And you can see they're also sort of the largest group in the population. So what we have, what we're going to present to you are the weighted data, right? So we tried to reduce the biases caused by any selection into our sample. And since we have the population figures, we can weight it to that data. I'm happy to answer questions about sampling and the methodology and so on later. So let's just jump into what we found and what is the role of beauty in science. The first thing we need to know is what scientists mean by beauty. And to get at this, we wanted to, before developing, it took us almost 2 years to develop the survey questionnaire and to figure out what the right categories were. And so we spent a good bit of time. I think we conducted, for that previous study before this one, I think we had interviewed some 400 scientists and asked them one open-ended question about whether they encounter, where do you encounter beauty in your work, if at all, and what does that mean to you? And so we had these open-ended answers, and we coded those answers and tried to come up with some categories. And then we went back into the survey, fed those categories in, got some more feedback from a pilot group, and then eventually ended up with a number of categories. So these are the things we heard from scientists, the most commonly used or the most recurring categories for what beauty means. So scientists talked about the inner logic of systems, the hidden order or patterns they encountered, elegance, simplicity, complexity, symmetry, a sense of fit, harmony, pleasing colors or shapes, and then some said asymmetry as well. Actually, I think we pushed that last category in there, the insistence of Marcelo Gleiser, a physicist who argues that symmetry is overrated and we need to really think about asymmetry as aesthetic. But these were the themes that kept coming up in our interviews, and so we were able to assess that, in our study in these 4 countries, 60% of scientists associate beauty with, right? So this is, what do you associate with beauty in science? With things like inner logic of systems, hidden order, patterns, and elegance. And these things vary by discipline, not surprisingly. If you're a physicist, you will find symmetry and simplicity beautiful, compared to, if you're a biologist, you would find complexity and the pleasing colors or shapes that you encounter beautiful compared to the other discipline. But in spite of that variation, we do find that there is agreement around a certain kind of aesthetic experience, which is the hidden order of patterns, the inner logic of systems. I'll say a little bit more about this. We've categorized this into sort of 3 different types of beauty, but we can see both the similarities and differences. And so this corroborates what some other scientists have argued, that in physics, there is really this preference for simplicity, particularly in equations and in looking for fundamentals and trying to come up with a unifying theory of nature and so on. And whereas in biology, what really matters is adequate complexity, right? But those differences are not the only type of aesthetic experiences that scientists have in their work. So I'll come back to say a little bit more about these different types of beauty. The other thing we wanted to look at is, where in scientific work do scientists encounter beauty? And here we found that the vast majority of scientists encounter beauty in the phenomena they study, right? Cells, particles, stars, what have you. 75% of physicists and biologists find beauty there. There's a little bit of difference in a couple of areas. When it comes to scientific theories, we see physicists are much more likely to find beauty in scientific theories than biologists are, and physicists are a little bit more likely than biologists to find beauty in the writings of prominent scientists. But otherwise, all these other areas, there's really no difference between biologists and physicists and where they encounter beauty in their work. So largely in the phenomena they study, in theories, in teaching, and the actual process of doing research. And then you see a bit of a rift. And then these other categories, scientific conference presentations, very few, a third of scientists or so find beauty in presentations. Workplaces, we have a lot of interesting data about gloomy, depressing workplaces with no windows. So we have a lot of those stories as well. Journal articles, another area where we've heard some complaints about bad writing and so on. Conference presentations are interesting because scientists do look very often for beauty in presentations. They want to communicate. They want beauty in the presentations that they themselves are creating, but they don't really find it in other people's work, which maybe says something interesting. You can tell me what that means. But this is where scientists find beauty in their work. And then we asked sorry, yeah.
I hope it's okay.
Please, yeah.
Questions.
Yeah.
Were people asked to choose, let's say, 3 categories?
No.
They could choose as many.
Yeah. So the question was, were people asked to choose from these? No. So this was a check all that apply kind of thing. And so people could choose multiple categories, and yeah, it looks like in spite of having the option, they very few chose these, right? And everyone sort of almost chose the first couple there. So yeah, this question was one of the select all that apply kind of things. This is interesting. For the interviews that we did, and we did these interviews over Zoom, we found a lot of scientists wanted to show us. We asked them, where do you encounter beauty in their work? They said, let me show you. And they would go and bring something out, right? And so we essentially then asked them to, for every interview we did, just said, can you like go and give us an example, a visual example of something that you consider beautiful in your research. And so we've collected some 200 images of this sort, and these are just some of the examples that we got from the scientists we talked to. And so some of them would give us an image of the observatory in which, if you're an astronomer and there's an observatory that this one particular astronomer called a technological cathedral, and it thought the instrument itself was magnificent. And then other examples of experiments and of some of the data that they had found, as well as the phenomena, again, that they were studying. And so you see a wide variety of sorts of examples of where it is that they encounter beauty and how those were depicted in images. And some of these images hang in their labs, and they're things that motivate them, inspire them to continue. Here's a quotation from a biologist we talked to. He said, to be honest, anytime you look underneath the microscope, as a biologist, there's some experiments that are just more exciting to do than others because there's a visual aspect to it that's more stimulating. It's more exciting to see a cell responding under the microscope than having a graph that's just showed you this, some quantification of the data, if you will. Even though the quantification is equally, if not more important, it's not as maybe satisfying as that, right? As seeing a phenomenon sort of unfold. And so looking under it, it was just really a beautiful moment, seeing we looked at the structure of the cell being rearranged in the way that I predicted. It was exciting at the time to go run to the other people in the lab to come look at it. It was really a joy to share. You see a lot of different themes here that come up in the interviews, right? So we see, first of all, a contrast between things that are more versus less beautiful. For biologists in particular, there was a bit of a challenge when we asked them for those images, because some of them would tell us, well, it's actually seeing the whole process unfold. That's what's really beautiful and exciting, actually looking at how these bacteria move. I can't give you an image, but let me send you a video. And they would have those kinds of examples. There are ways in which people talked about being the first to discover something, and the thrill of discovery as being one of the most beautiful aspects of science. And then also being able to share that with people. It's so vital to have a community of people who you can share things with. We had some scientists tell us, the thing about beauty in science is I can encounter something that's really moving, that's sort of absolutely, astonishing for me and awe-inspiring. And then I want to run home and tell my spouse, but my spouse is not a scientist, so they don't understand. So I can't really tell them. And so that's why I need students, and that's why I need peers. I need somebody to share this with. Otherwise, it would kill me. Like you're so filled with excitement that there has to be a community that so that you could share that with. And so there's something about encountering beauty that makes you want to share it, makes you want to somehow communicate it. A physicist told us, a little bit about so it's not just the beauty of the phenomena, but even the beauty of the devices that they used, right, of the equipment. So this one person was telling us, we put one of the detectors, and here's an example of one of the detectors we were using, and that's a silicon thing that's a couple of millimeters across, and the actual devices we put together, they end up being physically beautiful, but a lot to me is what's really beautiful about them is that there's so much detail in it, and the fact that we can actually create these sorts of detectors and that human beings are capable of doing this, that's something that fills a lot of scientists with awe. But all of this is something that we're categorizing as sort of the sort of sensory beauty of science, of encountering beauty in the phenomena and in the objects and so on of science. Okay, so how often do these experiences happen? Are they rare? Are they frequent? We give them lots of options, and so one of the options that I'll report here is that what are the things you encounter at least a few times a year? So at least a few times a year, 86% of scientists said they felt pleased by the elegance of a scientific object. 81% felt a sense of childlike delight or joy during their work. 66% were pleased by the surprising discovery of a hidden order or deeper systems underlying what they were researching. 52% felt they were in the presence of something grand, the really sort of powerful, awe-inspiring experience. Half the scientists that we talked to in these countries felt that at least a few times a year. That's pretty frequent. I mean, we thought that would be a lot less. Awe is generally a very rare human experience to have, and to report that a few times a year for half the sample is really quite something. And even then, some scientists would tell us, I've had only one such experience. Just because I've not had it frequently doesn't mean it's not important, right? So you can have one really powerful experience and that can sustain you throughout your career as making everything worthwhile. So the three types then of beauty that we find are what we call sensory beauty, useful beauty, and the beauty of understanding. And I'll tell you a little bit about these. I'd love your feedback on this. I don't know if the first type should be called sensory, but these are at the moment, from our about 6 months of trying to analyze these data, our best attempt at making sense of what's going on. So sensory beauty refers to almost what it sounds like, right? The 75% of scientists find the phenomena they study beautiful. Biologists, for instance, told us that a pollinator visiting a flower, both of those things to me are incredibly beautiful. The two of them interacting with each other is one of the most beautiful things in nature. That's why I study pollination. So encountering beauty is what draws a lot of scientists to become scientists in the first place. Another biologist told us, if you don't feel wonder in front of certain things, you cannot even be a scientist. I mean, you have to be able to be moved by these things. The second kind is what we're calling useful beauty, and that is beauty as a heuristic. And perhaps that might be of most interest to you all in a Center for Theoretical Sciences. The use of aesthetic criteria for making judgments about what counts as good science, what counts as good theory, et cetera. So typically aesthetic criteria used here are symmetry, simplicity, elegance, aptness, and so on. There's some pretty famous and controversial quotations around this. Dirac, for instance, claimed that it is more important to have beauty in one's equations than to have them fit experiment. Gell-Mann argued that in fundamental physics, a beautiful or elegant theory is more likely to be correct than a theory that is inelegant. Lots of other quotations like this. Wilczek, more recently in an interview, said, I have theories for what the dark matter is that I think are certainly driven by beauty. I have theories about states of matter that I'm very confident are correct. They're driven by beauty, but haven't yet been verified experimentally. It's what drives a lot of my work in physics, is trying to get more beautiful equations and a more coherent description of how things work. It's been successful in the past quite a bit, and so it has a good record, not only in my work, but in the work of my community and colleagues. So I think we're on a roll. Let's hope it keeps going. And one of the things that's going on here is a process of what the philosopher James McAllister calls aesthetic induction. So the idea is that because of the track record of particular theories or particular aesthetic criteria in those theories for producing good, sort of successful empirical performance, those aesthetic criteria become associated with truth, right? So there's a way in which a particular set of criteria, whatever Wilczek means by beauty here in his equations, those criteria have proved successful in the past, and so you think they're going to prove successful in the future. This is quite debated. There are people who argue that many beautiful theories in the past were wrong. Ugly ones turned out to be right, and then once they turned out to be right, they were no longer considered ugly. Others like Jim Baggett have complained that theories of supersymmetry, superstrings, et cetera, driven largely by beautiful mathematics are not only not true, they're not even science, they're fairy tale physics. Sabine Hassenfelder, in a recent book, Lost in Math, has argued that criteria like naturalness and elegance and simplicity are misleading. They're bad. We should not spend our time investing in things driven by those criteria. We will waste billions of euros building larger colliders, and it's not going to really produce any new physics. So, so you have this sort of debate around here on this issue, and what we can do is to just measure to what extent scientists agree or disagree with some of those sorts of claims. So well, we've asked them a number of questions, and here in this graph, we're dividing it by scientists who consider themselves theoretical physicists, other physicists, and then biologists. And what we're doing for how we did this, essentially, we just asked scientists, what are your subfields that you work in? And we gave them a text box. And if anybody said theoretical anything, we threw them into this bucket. Maybe that's not the right way to do it. You can inform us. For the moment, anyway, these are the scientists who we're cataloging as theoretical physicists. And so you can see on the first question, so science helps us better access the beauty that actually exists in the world. This is Frank Wilczek's claim in his book, A Beautiful Question. Not much difference across any of these categories. Similarly, on this other one, it is important for scientists to encounter beauty, awe, and wonder in their research. So notice the vast majority of scientists agree with these statements, and there's no difference across fields at all, right? Now, Gelman, a good theory or experiment needs to be elegant. Or sorry, that's not Gelman, but this is Gelman, the next one. But does a good theory or experiment need to be elegant? Maybe so. Theoretical physicists, because they're a small subset of our sample, the error bar is pretty large there. If we had a larger sample, probably the confidence interval would be much smaller. So it looks like theoretical physicists are more likely to think that good theories need to be elegant compared to any of the other groups. They're also a bit more likely to think to agree with Gelman, that a beautiful or elegant theory is more likely to be correct than one that is inelegant. But still, we're talking only about 40% of theoretical physicists agree there. Is mathematical beauty a good indicator of scientific truth? I think that's Poincaré. Not much difference between theoretical physicists and others, but certainly biologists, of course, disagree or at least have lower levels of agreement. And this is Hassenfelder's claim. The pursuit of aesthetic considerations like symmetry and elegance is bad for scientific progress. Only 10% of scientists agree with her, right? No difference across these fields. There were some questions we asked only of physicists, because in our pilot work, when we asked them of biologists, they kind of laughed. They didn't think that we should ask them. And these were the kinds of questions. So these are, first one, well, obviously, perhaps they didn't care about this. Society should invest more resources to pursue a unified theory of physics. That's one of the things that Hassenfelder particularly thinks is a problem. So, some 50% of theoretical physicists agree with that, compared to some 40% of other physicists. This is another one of Hassenfelder's arguments, this naturalness criterion. In scientific theories and models, I consider numbers that are much larger or smaller than 1 to be ugly. Again, not the vast majority of theoretical physicists agree with that. And here we have Dirac. It is more important to have beauty in one's equations than to have them fit experiment. So some 70-something% of physicists disagree with Dirac on that and think that, nah, that's just not true. So what do we conclude from this? Maybe some of Hassenfelder's worries are misplaced, that these things are not such a big problem for most physicists. But again, maybe that's not the right way to interpret what we're finding. Would love to hear what you all think. So these are just the perspectives of individual scientists on our surveys. In our interviews, when we talk to scientists, physicists or biologists, the vast majority of them say, look, beauty is useful. Sometimes it's a good guide. It's something that you should take into account, but don't let it be your only guide, right? So there's a reasonableness to which you have to subject it, and an experiment has to be what drives everything. So that was the kind of unanimous sense from most of the interviews we had. We don't want to discredit beauty. It does play a role in sort of theory choice or guiding your certainly in experimental design, which I'll show you in a second. Beauty plays a bigger role, it seems, and a more reliable role. But when it comes to theory, the sort of scientists seemed a bit more circumspect. Yeah.
In the previous slide, to the previous one, when you say mathematical beauty is a good indicator of scientific truth, you said Poincaré, but I'm trying to see how is that very different from the other two questions in some sense. Or another way to say it is that is it dependent on the question that you ask? I mean, the wording, how sensitive are the answers to the way it's worded? Because it seems like that last statement is sort of, I mean, more or less similar to the other ones, but
yeah.
the results are not, especially
Not the
for
same.
biologists.
Yeah. So I suspect biologists might be interpreting these questions differently, whereas physicists may not be, right? I think elegance in physics may be much more closely tied to mathematics, at least for theory. If you're an experimentalist, I'm not really sure how you would answer these questions. I'm not sure how one would, if one doesn't typically think about theory. If somebody is an astronomer and is mainly interested in observation, I don't know. I don't know what these things would mean to them. So it's a good question. I would have to, I'd have to talk to scientists more to see how they're interpreting it. I suspect for biologists, though, that there would be certainly. I'm surprised that there's nearly 20% of them think that mathematical beauty is a good indicator of scientific truth, and I wonder what that means. And yeah, so these are the kinds of things we would like to explore, and to have maybe some focus groups and conversations and try to unpack what those things mean. The other thing we wanted to know is where in the scientific process do aesthetic criteria matter? Like, where are they relevant, right? So you can have these experiences, but do they actually matter? Here are also some interesting similarities and differences. So the leading category is in science communication, right? So 60-something% of both physicists and biologists say, yeah, when I present or communicate results, also when I analyze results, aesthetics matters. You want presentations that are aesthetically pleasing. You want interpretations to be elegant. Project design, it seems biologists care a bit more than physicists about beauty there. Making observations in the lab or the field, again, biologists seem to care about beauty more. It seems more important there. Developing a project plan or grant application, I don't know. Maybe you've got to make your grant applications more aesthetically pleasing if you're a biologist. I'm not really sure what that means. Similarity, again, in developing hypotheses or theories. Physicists more, certainly a little bit more when it comes to coding, confirming hypotheses, et cetera, doing theoretical calculations, of course. Not surprisingly, they find beauty more relevant there, right? You want code to be elegant. You don't want messy code. You want your calculations to be, to be elegant. Again, so not too surprising to find some of these results. But it's good to see that variation across the scientific process. Experimental design is one of those other aspects of what we're calling useful beauty, right? So what one scientist told us, a biologist told us, I try to make our experimental design as elegant and as direct as possible, which for me is a form of beauty, because the less effort we have to put into getting an answer, the better. Faster, the cleaner, the fewer different parameters we have to control for in an experiment, the more convincing and clean I think the information will be that they get out of it. We did not encounter anyone in our interviews who thought that elegance was irrelevant to experimental design. Nobody said a messy experiment is great. You don't, at least intentionally, it's fine to sort of serendipitously discover something, but you don't want to sort of intentionally design a sort of an ugly kind of experiment, right? So again, beauty as a heuristic might be more useful when it comes to experiment than theory. The beauty of understanding is this third category, which we think is the most important. And here's the kind of example from one of our interview respondents was a Nobel laureate who told us the beauty is recognizing this is what is going on. There's a leap to the truth or a leap to a sense of generalization or something that's beyond the particular, but in some way represents the real thing that's there, that's going on. We think of that as beautiful. Like looking behind the appearances, that sense of hidden order or patterns, and grasping the mechanism behind things. And so here's where 86% of scientists report that they were thrilled by a new insight at least a few times a year. 83% felt that their research opened up new mysteries, like that Feynman quotation. 61% felt a sense of reverence or respect about what they were discovering. 60% ascribed beauty to the hidden order and to the inner logic of systems, right? So all of that is this sort of beauty of understanding, which repeatedly a lot of scientists told us that they thought, like, this is I'm in the business of discovering this kind of beauty. Like I'm here for that understanding, that insight, and that is why I do science. There's no other reason to do it, right? So there are people who would tell us, particularly those who were doing a lot more basic science, were like, look, I'm not going to cure cancer. I'm here because I want to understand how reality works, and that is a beautiful experience. And so for a lot of scientists, it seems that science is this sort of aesthetic quest in this sense, not in the sense of sensory beauty, or not in the sense of necessarily heuristics, but in this kind of, This, by the way, when I've been doing some additional interviews with poets and artists and musicians and so on, and poets in particular talk about beauty in this same way, that saying that beauty is to recognize, and I encounter in a poem something that helps me recognize, this is what's going on. This is how reality is. That's what beauty is. And that's pretty much the same thing that our Nobel Prize winner in biology told us. Okay, so what, right? What are the consequences of scientists encountering beauty at work? And we think the consequences are at three different levels: personal, institutional, and societal. At the personal level, we think these experiences of beauty contribute to motivation, perseverance, and well-being. So 62% of scientists said that encountering beauty in their scientific work motivated them to pursue their scientific careers. This, for some reason, we found national differences that we didn't understand. So some of these variables vary by nation, not all of them, in ways that we don't quite understand. So this is American scientists here. Something like 78% of them said that, responded that encountering beauty is what made them pursue science in the first place. And all other countries were around 53, 54%. 57% of scientists say that encountering beauty improves their scientific understanding. 50% say that encountering beauty in their scientific work helps them persevere when they experience difficulties or failure in their scientific work. We had lots of stories about that. This is one of the others. This is the one publication we have at the moment from this project in a psychology journal. Essentially, we find that the more frequently you encounter beauty in your work, the higher your well-being, and that's controlling for all kinds of factors, including the pandemic-related variables, right? So all things being equal, the more frequently you encounter beauty, awe, and wonder in your work, the better your sense of well-being. For reasons we don't understand, Indian scientists encounter the most beauty in their work compared to other countries, like way over everybody else, very high levels of regularly encountering beauty in their work. Also, for reasons we don't understand, Indian scientists were the least likely to say that it is important for scientists to encounter beauty in their work. So it happens all the time. It's not that important. Help me understand what that means. So there are, of course, obstacles to encountering beauty in science. And very often in our interviews, we would hear these kinds of institutional factors like the publish or perish culture, the over-specialization, which makes it impossible to see the big picture, funding constraints that make it impossible to ask the really big and important and interesting questions, mistreatment, particularly women complain about mistreatment, mental health challenges, particularly among postgraduate students. All of these things contribute to many scientists saying that the beauty that they hoped to encounter in their work, or that drew them to become scientists in the first place, is no longer part of their day-to-day experience in science. And so there's ways in which the culture of science beats the wonder out of you for some people, right? It's not for everyone. Over the overall sense, the scientists are doing well, regularly encountering beauty in their work, but there is a significant minority who don't. And we had also interviewed some folks who left academia and told us how that this publish or perish system is killing their creativity. And there's this fear of, if you don't do this, if you don't hit these metrics, you're not going to be able to do what you love, right? You're not going to be able to pursue that beauty if you don't meet all of these stringent requirements and put up with supervisors who are exploiting you, et cetera, and unreasonable criteria. So that's one challenge. And so here you can see a little bit of a U-shaped curve in the frequency of aesthetic experiences at work. And so it's highest when you're a postgraduate student, and then sort of dips down when you're in the thick of the tenure process, and then gets a bit better later on. And there's, of course, a selection effect that a lot of people have opted out by this point and quit, right? So, but still never goes back to those initial levels of the graduate students. So those of you who are students, try to savor and cultivate that experience of beauty in your work. There's another aspect of this project that we're trying to make sense of. Sorry, yeah. Sorry, the why is this? This is it's a scale of, it's a frequency scale of like never encountering beauty to like daily, and so so those are the points on that scale. Does that make? Yeah, so the lowest is never, and the highest is like something like more than once a week or something like that. So not daily, but more than once a week. And I think it's out of 5. So 5 is like once a week or more. So I can't remember the exact points on that scale, but it's one of those. I think it's a 5-point. It's a 5-point Likert, and I can't remember the exact wording there. So there is another couple of things we heard that we're trying to make sense of, which is maybe that, we should be careful of overemphasizing beauty. We had a few scientists who talked to us about this idea that beauty it's encountering beauty that makes science a vocation or calling, right? It's this sort of, it's not just a job. It's something else. It's like a higher calling. 70-something% of scientists agree with that statement, that they see science as not just a job, but it's like a calling or something higher. But we had some scientists in our interviews who said, be careful. This is what ends up leading to our exploitation. This is a female physicist who struggled a lot in her career. And she said, essentially, I had these people telling me, you should be doing this for free. You should be glad that you're getting paid to do this at all. Why are you asking for promotion? Why are you asking for tenure, et cetera? And so her argument was, any job that positions itself as a vocation is simply saying that the people who do it don't deserve to be treated well, don't deserve to be paid as much, et cetera. And others, we've heard this complaint from other people as well. One person who said the culture is, we're paying you for 40 hours a week, but you're expected to be on all the time. If you're not doing that, you're not really a true scientist, not a true member of academia. That's really corrosive. It doesn't allow people to be human. So there's a sense in which you can say, yeah, I'm doing this because it's beautiful, but it could also be enabling in the way that being married to an alcoholic can be enabling of toxic behaviors. So we should be careful, is what some scientists told us. So let me end there. In summary, we're seeing these 3 distinct types of beauty that we're calling sensory beauty, useful beauty, the beauty of understanding. We see similarities and differences between disciplines in the role of beauty, where scientists encounter it, where it matters. Scientists seem ambivalent about the reliability of beauty as a heuristic, at least when it comes to theory. The beauty of understanding is valuable to physicists and biologists alike. We think that this kind of beauty is probably what the public needs to learn most from scientists. So in a polarizing world where we're all locked in our echo chambers increasingly, what is it going to take for us to be able to appreciate what the Nobel Prize-winning economist called, Daniel Kahneman called the joy of having been wrong, right? So to appreciate the beauty of understanding, you have to have intellectual humility. You have to be willing to let go of your pet ideas. You have to be open to surprise. You have to even appreciate being wrong, because there's something more that you can learn. We think that's what maybe the most important thing for the public to learn from scientists about the beauty of the work they do. As we saw, encountering beauty at work more frequently is associated with better well-being. We think in science, but also elsewhere, this may be true. Institutional pressures seem to affect aesthetic experience as well as retention in science. And when considering the role of beauty in science, we should be careful of cognitive bias and exploitation. So thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I look forward to your questions. You can learn more about our project. Our project website is wellbeinginscience.com. We pitched this as a study of well-being so that we didn't just get those scientists who cared about aesthetics to take our survey. And there's another project related to this called Beauty at Work, where we're exploring how beauty matters in other fields beyond science through videos and so on.
Thanks very much for a very stimulating talk. Now, floor is open for questions. Ajit?
I was wondering what motivated you to choose physicists and biologists only in
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, I mean, a couple of reasons. The first one is we had already done a previous study of scientists, and we'd focused only on physicists and biologists in that study. So we already had that, but really the main reason was we wanted to reduce the amount of variation. So we already had 4 countries, and we then tried to sort of add, initially we were going to do physics, biology, and chemistry, and developing that with a survey firm just turned out to be really messy. It would just not have been feasible in the amount of time that we had for this project for them to scrape all the data that was needed. And so they said you have to stick to 2 fields or reduce the number of countries, and we chose to stick to 2 fields. But we would like to do mathematics and chemistry as well, but maybe that'll be a future study.
of how these disciplines?
Well, I mean, so there is only one, there was an article that from one of the advisors of our project, Ben MacArthur, who's a mathematician in the UK, who had written a Nature article on beauty in physics and biology, and really essentially made that distinction that we found in our work, that physicists really find beauty in simplicity, biologists in complexity. We didn't find anyone comparing chemistry to either physics or biology in a different way. So, so that was one of the other things that justified our choice, to say that there's at least some grounding the literature for why these two disciplines should matter. And I mean, Philip Ball, who's a great science writer, has written about beauty in chemistry, and we thought that there was probably enough overlap with physics and biology to cover the kinds of things he was looking at. So I don't know if it's an adequate justification, but we ended up just having to pick something, and we thought there was enough justification, yeah, over there.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yes.
So how do you calculate error bars in all your surveys?
How do we calculate them? Well, we have, I mean, the confidence, it's a 95% confidence interval. So we just essentially look at the distribution and what the CI, I mean, we use Stata, the statistical software, it spits out the confidence interval for each of those things. We just use that.
Okay, I'm curious because you circulate a questionnaire and
Right.
everybody just writes their own opinion or ticks
Yeah.
at the respective answers.
Right.
So you must get some fixed numbers. Like
Yes.
This much, this much.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, how do you calculate?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, what we're doing is we're weighting it, right? So it's not just the sample statistics; it's weighted to the population, and so there's a distribution there in terms of their variance in the weighting process. That's essentially what we've got there. So the ones where the sample size is really low or the proportion is really low, that has a higher error bar. So you'll see the US cases of a higher error bar because they have the smallest sample and the highest population percentage. Oh, sorry, they're the largest number of scientists in the population, but the smallest in our sample, and so that they usually have a higher error bar because that the weighting has a larger range there. But we just stick to, essentially we have a command that we use in Stata, and it gives us the information, so we don't manually calculate it.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a self-selection error or a self-selection thing that you tried to take into?
Yeah, so we have a sort of I can't remember the exact name now. It's escaping my mind. But sort of a propensity. Anyway, there's a technique sort of to assess whether there's any kind of bias in the selection vis-a-vis just the population parameters we're aware of. So we only have country, institution size, discipline. So on those indicators, we were able to sort of do a little bit of analysis, and so the survey firm did that for us, and it looks as though scientists who have slightly better well-being are more likely to take the survey, which sort of makes sense. That if you're really miserable, like if you're really, and we even got some emails from people saying, "Look, I don't even have time to eat lunch. How am I going to take this survey?" So those who are really kind of harried are not going to bother to take a survey. You have to have a certain amount of wherewithal to be able to spare time for this. But it didn't look like it was huge. Certainly on the aesthetics thing, we tried to mitigate bias by we didn't brand this as a study of aesthetics. There's of course a country level skew, which is that Indian scientists were much more likely than any other country to take the study. The US were least likely to take it. So for sure that is a factor, and we try to wait but it doesn't solve all the problems. Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. Now I was just thinking about this issue of beauty. I mean, a couple of points actually. Maybe there are hidden questions there, if you don't mind. The first point is that nature wouldn't care what our species on this small rock thinks about what it is in some sense, right? So we are discussing mainly our way of trying to understand, explore, and also use it for our societal reasons. So, that's one point. The other point is that this beauty seems to be a thing that depends on scale, in the sense that when we talk of the very elegant and beautiful equations of elementary particle physics, like the Standard Model, it's a very successful theory of the atomic scale, or even smaller than that. Fine, it's nice to write it down. And in fact, if you go down to one of the pits of CERN, the Standard Model is basically summarized in one page in terms of some Feynman diagrams. Okay, it's amazing, no? The elegance, you will say beautiful. But if you want to derive the consequences of the Standard Model for, let's say, nuclear physics, it's a very messy affair. And I wonder whether the people who do that call it beautiful till they find an explanation somewhere at a larger scale, actually. So somehow this idea of beauty seems to be connected with scales or complexity also. And in between, it may not be very beautiful. It's like climbing a very hard mountain until they reach the summit.
Yeah.
Nothing looks very beautiful most of the time, actually.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there that I think that's true. I mean, we talked to scientists about the frustrations in the scientific process that you're all probably very familiar with, and hours and hours of laboring without any kind of reward, not knowing whether there's any light at the end of the tunnel. But there's a sense, I think, in which scientists talk about having those moments of climbing those mountains and knowing that it's possible, knowing that others have done it, that allows these experiences to be helpful. I mean, the other thing though is on, I think it's a really important point to think about why it is we should, I mean, given that we are insignificant creatures on this insignificant planet and so on, why should the things that we find beautiful matter? Scientists have told us that itself is something that there's some scientists who find that beautiful. The fact that there's no reason for us to be able to like evolutionarily, there's no reason for us to know the rate of the acceleration of the universe or something like that, right? So the fact that it is possible for us to do this is awe-inspiring. So that itself is actually, Mario Livio is an astrophysicist who says that's one of his criteria of beauty is the Copernican principle that we're so insignificant, and that itself is one of his definitions of beauty. Then there are others like Frank Wilczek, who argue that it is odd that these equations that explain so much happen to be very simple, very elegant, and there's no need for that to be the case. And that is really striking, and that I think has led him and others to keep looking for beautiful solutions to problems. If our ability to recognize beauty matches with what has worked so far, then perhaps it'll continue to do so in the future. But there's no, a priori, I can't imagine why does that need to be the case? Right?
One more comment, if you don't mind. There is this great emphasis on symmetry in the laws of physics, but most of the world around you is not symmetric. It's a case of broken symmetry, actually.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful also.
Yeah.
I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that what you call beautiful perhaps has something to do with the way you are relating to the world. From your consciousness or something. I don't know.
Exactly. No, I think that matters, and that those I think our consciousness is patterned by the communities in which we spend our time, right? I mean, our cultures, our tribes, our disciplines. I mean, those things, they're not totally idiosyncratic, which is the thing that we find here, right? We didn't see an infinite range of definitions of beauty when we gave them open-ended questions. There were only about a dozen categories or so that kept coming up. So yeah, I think you're right there. Yeah.
Yeah, this works now. So I'm curious about whether in your interviews you saw any relation between the perceived beauty of an explanation or a theory or a phenomenon and its generality. I would expect that this differs considerably between physics and biology in relation to the simplicity, complexity difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way in which beauty is defined in, at least for some theoretical physicists is, I mean, this sort of change without change, right? This idea that you can translate it across different scales and so on. And that's what makes something a law. And that is an aesthetic criterion. So by that definition, you could not have a law that's not beautiful. So biologists wouldn't look at it that way, right? I think for a lot of biologists, it's the specificity of this particular protein, and it doesn't, the fact that other proteins are arranged differently doesn't detract from the complexity of this particular thing. So yeah, I think that has to do with the symmetry, the preference for symmetry among physicists, and then the complexity among biologists for sure.
I mean, some of your results, it probably has a bearing also on science communication by scientists as to how or what they should communicate.
Yeah.
Probably, I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Yeah. So one of the initial questions or hunches we had was that maybe the value of a project like this could be that if we could help the public to experience what scientists find beautiful, maybe that could improve public trust in science. Scientists certainly would say that beauty matters a lot to them when they communicate science to their students, to their peers. But when we ask scientists, do you think that beauty matters in communicating science to the public? Do you think it would help improve public trust in scientists? A lot of them said, no, not really. They would tell us things like, look, there's already a lot of beautiful documentaries about science, and doesn't seem to do that much for increasing trust in scientists. They thought it was pretty naive. Essentially, there's an old argument that Thomas Hobbes made, 350 years ago in a squabble he had with Boyle. So Boyle, developed the experimental method, and he had this sort of great conviction that, look, for the first time, people can come together. You can come to my laboratory, and we can witness this experiment unfolding, and then we can have agreement, right? And that could solve our problems, where we can demonstrate something, and everybody who witnesses it sees the same thing, and then we can all have agreement. And Hobbes, who was, this time much older than Boyle, laughed at him. You must be nuts, because everyone who's going to come to see the same set of facts is going to come with their priors, with their preconceptions, and they're going to filter it through those preconceptions. And so if what you have to say corroborates with their priors, then they'll be happy to support you. If anything you have to say challenges those priors, then no matter how beautiful your experiment, they're going to oppose it. They're going to interpret it differently. So data don't interpret themselves. And a lot of the scientists we talked to had basically that Hobbesian kind of cynicism, that people, no matter how beautiful the science is, people will come to it with their politics. And if you say anything that threatens their priors, their commitments, their identity, they're not going to accept it. Which we found a bit disappointing to hear, but it helped us to think about, well, then what is the value of beauty in science outside of the scientific community? And that's where I think that what I was saying earlier about the beauty of understanding, like if you can cultivate the ability to enjoy being wrong and to have a taste for changing your mind in the way that happens in science, I mean, that's the kind of beauty that really I think the world needs. Certainly the beauty of stars and the Webb telescope and all that stuff is great, but we think that the beauty of understanding is more important. So that I think is the kind of way in which that aspect of science I think needs to be emphasized.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I was thinking about beauty outside the scientific context, but in the context of engineering in particular.
Right.
Have you thought about how do engineers perceive beauty? Because they are very utilitarian at the end of the day. They have to be utilitarian and it has to work, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I would, as an outsider to engineering, I would still think that they value beauty with the design robotic algorithms or control algorithms. I think an element of beauty probably plays a role there as well. What are your thoughts on that? Is there some studies that say something about it?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think there would be different aesthetic criteria. They would have to do with design. They would have to do with, certainly with, function. Right? So things have to work. I mean, you can't, have a beautiful idea that doesn't work is not going to be beautiful. I haven't studied it formally. I'm not aware of studies on it, but I'm sure it exists as, I mean, there are design schools that draw a lot on engineering. So I'm sure that it's an important principle, but I'm hoping to at some point interview engineers and get a better sense. Yeah.
So regarding the point that you mentioned, this skepticism about the scientists about how to influence public opinion, etc. Perhaps the scientists are not qualified to comment on that aspect because that's a different domain of study. We as social scientists should comment on that. So
Sure.
you should not probably take the scientists' opinion too seriously there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see, I think so. I mean, probably, yeah. We have not really measured the extent to which the public would change their minds based on the beauty of scientific. I mean, but I think there's still something to what the scientists are saying because it's true. There are these documentaries and so on. They do exist. So there's a lot that on that sensory beauty part. There's just there's no shortage of that available. I think part of it. One of the other things that's come up in our interviews where we think scientists are right is that they see a lot of science communication as being very moralistic, as being very kind of finger wagging. You should listen to us. We're the experts. You're the stupid people. We're the So there's a recognition that okay, that's not working.
Yeah.
We need something else. So, but they don't think beauty is the right way to solve that, right? But you're right. Yeah, I don't know if we should take scientists at their word.
Yeah, so my understanding is that there is a lot of evidence from the social sciences that a lot of cultural contexts that people grow up determine their opinions on various things.
Sure.
Right? And some level of understanding of even how scientists functions, what motivates them, etc., would probably help people even to familiarize themselves with that way of looking at the world, and maybe perhaps that could be helpful also in changing opinion on these things also.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, one of the things we've been trying to do is to do some science communication through this project to religious communities where there's a lot more tension, skepticism of science and so on, and showing the sort of humanizing the scientists and showing particularly the role of awe and wonder, right, and helping the public to maybe get a small taste of that awe and wonder themselves can help. But yeah, I think. I mean, it's a challenge too with, this certainly varies across countries. And, we were told, at least talking to Indian scientists, we were told by a lot of scientists that, look, the issue here in India is not necessarily skepticism of science. It's more the lack of basic education. So that's a huge barrier to overcome. In the US, I mean, the problem with things like climate change is they've been a lot of mainstream science has been promoted by politicians on one side. And so everybody rejects, those on the other side reject that politician, reject the scientists. So that's the different issues across different countries. And so we're trying to figure out, those issues.
Actually, it may not be that different. So the question is, what kind of science threatens the dominant ideologies?
Yeah,
in the US, that is the evolution, climate change, etc. In India, it's different. That's all.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
There are no further questions. Let's thank Brandon for a very nice talk.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out, contact me. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas on what else should we analyze. I think we're just getting started with more data than we know what to do with. So very grateful for your time again, your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think that was so nice.
Yeah.